Hi, welcome everyone. We're just going to wait about a minute to allow people to come in, and then we'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. All right. Well, just a huge welcome to all of you um, coming today. This kicks off the beginning of our application period for the state of California's Extreme Heat and Community Resilience grant program. I am Braden Kay with the program, and I'm joined by a few of my colleagues that are a part of the Extreme Heat team here today, including Angelo, Colin, Kelly. And one of the things that we're doing as part of this kickoff to our program is we're highlighting some national best practices to give California tribes and communities and community-based organizations some ideas about the types of projects that you can do with this funding and get a sense of sort of the cutting edge of the field in terms of some of the great work that's happened around the country. And we're specifically highlighting a lot of Western U.S. Examples. And today we're privileged to have two very esteemed colleagues from the city of Tucson in Arizona that'll talk to us. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and just give a brief overview of the Extreme Heat program, talk a little bit about round two and what we're going to be funding here in this calendar year, and then we'll get into the conversation with the city of Tucson. Next slide. So round two, our second round of funding, $27.5 million. The money's coming from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the Prop 4 Climate Bond. Both of these sources of money are really for infrastructure projects. So unlike our first round, which was a real blank slate in terms of the types of things we were able to fund, we are going to be funding predominantly infrastructure projects in this round. Next slide. So we have in our first round we had 10 values guiding our program. We've tried to tighten it up at the leadership of Kelly Mezzaprado, who's on our team. Really, she advised us to make it less values, so we're now down to four. Those include harm reduction. So how is your project reducing harm, especially for people in your community that are most vulnerable to extreme heat? How are you working on partnerships? So if you're a city or you have a CBO partnership, if you're a community-based organization, or how are you partnering with local government when possible? Then belonging, which is a new value from last year around making sure that the infrastructure is made for the people that intend to use it, and that you're really practicing the ability to make it an accessible infrastructure that really feels like it comes from that place and speaks to that community. And then lastly, lasting community benefits, making sure that in any project you do, it's building momentum for you to have future investment in extreme heat infrastructure. So you're going to hear those values come up in what you hear from Tucson today, and then those values very much guide the questions that we ask in our application and how this round is designed. Next slide. So we have two types of infrastructure projects that we're funding in this round. There's the early infrastructure grant type. That's a planning document that has to have a demonstration project. So you'll hear Fatima talk about the heat action plan that the city of Tucson led. That's the type of plan, or one of the types of plans that could be funded by the early infrastructure grant. So that's important to pay attention to. So And then the advanced infrastructure grant is something you've already been planning for. You have a very firm sense of what you're building. It's a larger infrastructure project. We are asking that there's a component of that that has a future implementation playbook, meaning some kind of way of creating a pathway for future work and some kind of long-term either funding stream or design guidelines or program that allows you to do that work for years to come. And so you'll hear Blue Baldwin talk about Tucson Storm to Shade program. That's an example of the type of thing you could build the concept for in a playbook for the advanced infrastructure. So we hope that you, by listening to the Tucson examples today, it'll sort of seed your ideas of what's possible with mostly the early infrastructure grant type today, but you may also get some ideas for advanced infrastructure. Next slide. So in terms of eligible projects, the types of things that people are using or funding for, built environment solutions, so cool pavement, shading, cooling, building upgrades, hydration stations, transit shelters, nature-based solutions, so investments in urban forestry, green spaces, green stormwater infrastructure, which is you're going to hear Blue talk a lot about today. And then we've also in our first round and then in this round, interested in solutions that are combining both built environment solutions with nature-based solutions. Next slide. So to give you just a little bit of a reminder, the early infrastructure projects are 30-month projects. They are $750,000 to $1.2 million projects. 25 to 60% of the project has to be that demonstration project. And then we have minimums for how much money you're spending on your partnership and how much money you're spending on your belonging activities. Then the advanced infrastructure projects, those are $3 to $4.5 million projects, and 70% of your total budget needs to be spent on the infrastructure itself. We'll get into a lot more details of these projects and what they look like and allow you to ask questions at the two events that we're going to be doing on June 25th and 30th, but we're just trying to give you a little bit of a flavor. And now we have our grant guidelines, which are available. So we'll drop the link to our website so you can go and read the guidelines and get even more detailed descriptions of these two project types. Next slide. So we do have priority points, and you can read in more detail about what we're going to be prioritizing in terms of which communities are prioritized with this funding. And we'll have a special presentations around priority points and how that system is going to work. Next slide. And then in terms of who's eligible for applicants, local and regional public entities, community-based organizations, coalitions, public higher academic institutions, and then California Native American tribes or tribal entities. And then, when you come to our event on the 25th or the 30th or via email, you can ask us more specific questions if you're wondering about where your organization fits in terms of eligible applicants and co-applicants. Next slide. So in terms of the process, we have our first pre-application window that's open now. These pre-applications it's basically like the beginning part of your application. It's due July 21st. This is where if you want one-on-one TA and you really want to have our third-party provider, read your application, help brainstorm your solutions, help you think about your responses to the questions, then you need to apply in the first window that's due July 21st. So the idea is you'll give us that information. We'll let you know if you qualify for TA. We'll also give you some initial feedback on your application. If you don't need one-on-one TA, but you still want to apply, there's a second application window that's due on August 11th. So you'll be able to fill out the pre-application, get feedback from us. You just won't be eligible for one-on-one technical assistance. The idea is you have to do either window 1 or window 2. Once you fill that out, you get feedback from us, then you'll have access to the full application that has the budget and work plan, the narrative, other documents that you need to submit, and those will be due in October. Next slide. So this gives you a little bit of a sense of the timeline. We just released our notice of funding availability yesterday. The pre-application window is open. The first pre-application window closes July. That says 15th, Angelo, but it's 21st, so we'll switch that. Um, and then the second one closes in August, and then the full application deadline in October, with awards being announced hopefully in early 2027. Next slide. So now to the exciting part of today, introducing the city of Tucson. Um, I had the privilege of working in Arizona for many years and just have so much admiration for the work that the city of Tucson has done. In so many departments of the city. But we have the opportunity here today to learn from Fatima Luna, who is the Chief Resilience Officer, who will talk about the heat planning work that the city has led. I want you to listen to discussions around harm reduction and the work of CBO partnerships that the city has done as they built their plan. So that's going to be really helpful to you, I think. And then Blue Baldwin, with the Storm to Shade program, is going to be able to talk about their work. Both you'll hear about harm reduction and partnerships, but you'll also hear about belonging. I think one of the things that's amazing about what Tucson's done is the original green stormwater infrastructure work started in a few people's front lawns 25 years ago and now has turned into an officially long-term funded part of the city. That now Blue runs a staff that does infrastructure projects, operations and maintenance, and helps capture stormwater and provide all of the benefits, including shade and cooling benefits. So you'll learn about how that program really fosters a sense of belonging and community pride in the city and neighborhood pride, as well as the work of really creating this lasting infrastructure benefit that's building future resilience for decades and decades to come. So just so grateful that these two amazing leaders are willing to spend time with us today. We'll have them both present, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. If you have questions about the grant program, we really ask you to defer those to the events on the 25th and 30th. We'll be doing this session. Oh, well, let's go to the next slide briefly. Yeah, we'll be doing upcoming sessions. We're featuring Salt Lake City and City of Austin next week. And then the 25th and the 30th is really where we'll get deep into the guidelines. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to our colleagues in Tucson.
Thank you, Braden, for having us here. It is really like a pleasure to share the work that the City of Tucson is doing around building heat resilience. And so, yeah, my role today is to share how cities take science and data and put that into action through not only planning, but also like infrastructure and day-to-day operations. So at the City of Tucson, we treat extreme heat as a long-term, predictable challenge, not just an emergency. So we plan for it year round. So next slide, please. So Tucson is one of the fastest warming cities in the nation. So this year we had our earliest ever 100-degree day on record on March 19, and that beat our last year record in April. And so we also know that extreme heat is not just uncomfortable, but it is very deadly, and in fact, it kills more people than annually than hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes combined. Next slide. Um, and so we know that heat is not experienced equally across our city. Low income and communities of color are often hit first and worst. And this is mainly due to historic disinvestments and inequities in the built environment. So that's why equity has to be central to any heat resilience work. Next slide. And so to address this, the city of Tucson developed and adopted a heat action roadmap that focuses on building heat resilience at the individual, home, neighborhood, and community levels. So the roadmap combines both long-term heat mitigation and immediate heat management strategies. The plan was created with very intentional community input. And so it was co-developed with that community over a period of time. And in fact, we hosted in 2024 our first Southern Arizona Heat Summit so that we could develop this plan. And since then, we have kept the Heat Summit because the Tucson community saw it as a very valuable resource to our community. But the first summit main purpose was to help us develop these heat action roadmap. Next slide. And so a little bit about like our approach on doing this work. So in Tucson, we're building heat resilience by implementing both heat management and heat mitigation strategies. Next slide. And so heat mitigation, it's really about cooling the city over time by changing the built environment. And so to do that, the city is planting trees, increasing green infrastructure, and Blue is going to share a lot more about these, but also like designing safer and more micro mobility options across our city. So the way that we move around, right? We plan and move around our city, supporting weatherization and solar installations in low-income homes. We are also creating a Southwest climate adapted building codes with partners and decarbonizing and electrifying the city's fleets. And so we also offer fare-free public transit to reduce heat trapping emissions from the transportation sector, one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases. Next slide. So in terms of heat management, um, that is about protecting people for the heat that it's already here. So this is year-round work that begins in the winter with planning and coordination with partners. I mentioned the Southern Arizona Heat Summit that takes place in the winter in February. And so that kicks off our planning heat season. And so before the summer, we also outreach teams knock on hundreds of doors in heat vulnerable communities, and that includes mobile home parks. And we share heat safety information, check on residents, and provide very valuable information. And then from June to September, we open cooling centers. Last year, the city's cooling centers, we saw like about 5,000 visits. And that only includes the city centers. It does not include the 30 plus community-wide centers. And so during the heat season, we also distribute hundreds of heat relief kits, provide like mobile showers mainly to our unhoused neighbors. And so as part of like the Housing First program, they help connect people experiencing homelessness to shelter services and permanent housing, and they do this work year round. And in terms of workforce, the city is also protecting its workforce through the heat safety policies and heat protection ordinance and administrative directive. And through that work, we have trained thousands of employees, and we reduce the reported heat-related incidents by 75%. These are last year's numbers. So we are in the process of evaluating what that's looking like this year. Next slide. And so this year, we are also piloting a heat awareness loteria events. And so these events combine like social connection, heat education, and community outreach in a more engaging and culturally relevant way. This really idea came about from, I always hear the Red Cross say that one of the main indicators of how fast a community recovers from a natural disaster, including extreme heat, is how well they know their neighbors. And so that social cohesion piece is a critical part of the heat preparedness strategy. And so these heat awareness loteria events have been very successful in bringing people together, sharing space, learning. We provide prizes that are, heat safety supplies like cooling towels, fans, that local utility provides. TP provides weatherization kits. And so it's a really fun way to build social cohesion in preparation of the heat season. And so we're piloting that this year. It's going really well. And so I would encourage other cities to try something like this as well. Next slide. And so the city financially supports cooling at the household level through like trees, solar panels, weatherization, and home repair programs. Recently, we received an $11.5 million federal grant that focuses on manufacturer and mobile home communities, which are some of the most vulnerable communities in our region. And even though we have done a lot of work, we also know that the need is so much greater than the available resources. And identifying a sustained source of funding for heat work is, I would say, one of the most important conversations that we can have in spaces like this. So we know that like research matters, data matters, design matters, but implementation really requires long-term systems and funding. So cities cannot adapt to extreme heat through pilot projects or short-term grants alone. We need more creative solutions. Next slide. And so because of that, the city of Tucson has been exploring more innovative implementation partnerships. And so one example is an energy collaboration agreement that was negotiated between the city and our local utility, Tucson Electric Power. And so, if approved by voters as part of the franchise agreement process this November, the energy collaboration agreement will create a long-term funding source for this work, about $2 million per year with a 2% increase, a year after that. And so for 25 years, that's about $64 million. Next slide. And so, if it is approved again, this agreement will be the first of its kind in the state. And also, it would support, affordability programs, weatherization, energy efficiency, cooling and shade investments, resilient hubs, and workforce development. And what makes this important is not just like the funding itself, but the idea that cities need durable implementation mechanisms if we are serious about adapting to extreme heat. I also want to mention that this agreement was fully co-developed with community members. And we hosted over 10 community conversations or town halls where they basically told us what they wanted to see in this agreement between the city and the utility. And so that is the essentially the result of that work. So next slide. And so I'll just close with this. We know that extreme heat is no longer a future problem. So cities are already managing it every day. And so while research and innovation are essential, resilience ultimately depends on whether communities have like the partnerships, the systems, and the investments needed to put that knowledge into practice. So for us, heat resilience is not just about surviving the like hotter summers. It's also about creating that like community-wide network of support in a city where people can live safely. Affordability, it's very important as well as with dignity as our climate keeps warming. So I'll stop there. And yes, and blue is next.
Thanks, Fatima. Okay, I am now going to drill into one of the programs that the city has created in order to specifically address increasing urban heat. The program's called Storm to Shade, and I manage that program with 5 staff members. We are the City of Tucson's Green Stormwater Infrastructure Program. I will define what we mean specifically by green stormwater infrastructure on a future slide that has better pictures, but for now, just to paint the picture of where we're situated in the city and how we work, we are located in Tucson Water, which is the city's water delivery utility. We are not the wastewater utility. We are only water delivery. And within Tucson Water, we are in a division called Conservation and Stormwater Resources. We have a sister program, which is Tucson Water's Conservation Program, which does all sorts of very cool and progressive actions like providing rebates for folks who swap out water intensive um, utilities, or I'm sorry, rather appliances to water conserving appliances. They also provide rebates to folks to install rainwater harvesting cisterns at their properties and even rainwater harvesting basins at a rate of $1 per gallon. So some pretty cutting edge stuff happening over in Tucson Water's conservation program. We are adjacent to the conservation program as the green infrastructure program in the city. We are funded through a small fee on every Tucson Water utility customer's utility bill, which is based on consumption. So it's 15 cents currently per CCF, which is a centum cubic foot of water, 100 cubic feet of water, which averages around $1 a month for the typical household. This fee is assessed to both residential and commercial customers in the city of Tucson, not outside of the city of Tucson. That fee generates approximately $4 million annually. And on the next slide, thank you. This is what we do with it. Our mandates are 3. Number 1 is to build new green stormwater infrastructure throughout the 6 wards of the city of Tucson on publicly owned property only. So unlike our sister program, the conservation program, which works on both commercial and residential property, we only work on public property in the city of Tucson. Mandate number 2 is that we maintain everything that we build, as well as a whole bunch of legacy green infrastructure that has been constructed through various city programs on the last couple of decades. As Braden alluded to, the city of Tucson has a very strong water conservation ethic in the community. People who live in Tucson love to live here because it is very much nestled in and part of the Sonoran Desert, and they invite the Sonoran Desert into their personal properties and their homes, and we invite it into our public spaces as well. It is the most biodiverse desert in the world and is full of plants and animals that are extremely unique and provide all sorts of benefits. And so when the Storm to Shade program launched, there was already a lot of green infrastructure that had been constructed, and we have taken that on to maintain it as well. And we'll dive into maintenance in more detail later. Third mandate is that we do all of this work, both the construction of new GSI and the maintenance of existing GSI, with equity as our North Star. So we use a tool called Tree Equity Score, which we've customized for the city of Tucson specifically, that helps us to identify the areas of the city where we have both the most heat vulnerable populations and the least amount of access to green space and tree canopy. That map ends up looking like all sorts of maps that you would see that are describing equity issues in cities, such as food deserts, income, employment, etc. I want to take a moment here to note that Storm to Shade is a non-regulatory program. Unlike many green stormwater infrastructure programs throughout the country, our driver is not an MS4 permit. We are not doing this work in order to meet Clean Water Act standards. Rather, we are a voluntary program with the primary driver being urban heat mitigation and water conservation. So our goal is to add green space in urban environments in order to mitigate heat and to use stormwater resources as the primary irrigation resource. Next slide, please. And this is why we do it. This is our interpretive sign that really explores all of the wonderful co-benefits that come with green stormwater infrastructure, things like providing shade and cooling so that folks get outside and are able to be more comfortable and more active in the outdoor environment. Improving air quality through the addition of all of these trees and plants that take up carbon dioxide and release fresh oxygen. Supporting habitat and pollinators, inviting those wild creatures into our urban environments for beautification and biodiversity. Furthermore, we are pulling stormwater flows off of impervious surfaces and gray infrastructure across the city, from streets to parking lots to rooftops. And in doing that, we're extending the life cycles of those pieces of gray infrastructure. So again, our program is non-regulatory driven. We're in it for the co-benefits that green infrastructure provides. Next slide, please. This is just a quick screen grab from our website if you're interested in learning more. If you Google Storm to Shade Tucson, you will land on it through our Climate Action Hub, which has great information about all sorts of different climate initiatives, many of which Fatima referenced. But this is just a screen grab to show how many projects we are currently working on. So, and this is actually slightly out of date. I just looked it up and we're currently at 54 green stormwater infrastructure construction projects scattered throughout the city that are in some phase of either identified to in construction, to in design, or completed. And so if you'd like to look at those projects in more detail, you can click on any one of those points and a little story map will pop up to tell you more about the project and project partners. Next. So just to give you some visuals of what we do, often we partner with existing improvement projects in other departments at the city. In 2018, a large bond was passed to invest in our parks and our connections. And so this is an example of a project where we partnered with our parks department that was pouring a lot of resources into improving lighting, bathrooms, adding a dog park. And this was a section of the park that didn't have any planned improvements. We were able to identify a source of stormwater coming from this adjacent street into this area of the park that is underutilized and actually attracted a lot of negative behavior and activity. The neighbors were very concerned about wanting to activate this section of the park. And so we installed a curb cut, added a scupper to convey water from the street into this large vegetated swale, and add a walking path, a bench, signage, and now this section of the park has dozens of additional trees and shrubs and is also activated in a positive way. Next slide. This is another example of a park that was receiving an improvement. This is primarily a dog park project, but it's also adjacent to an arroyo, which leads to one of our major waterways. And so water was flowing through this park, through sort of the rights of way, blank areas that nothing was really happening in. They weren't taking advantage of the water flowing through these areas. And so we were able to capture those flows, direct them into vegetated basins, and in that same way, add dozens and dozens of native shade trees, pollinators, etc. Next slide. Parking lots. So this is also in a park, but this is a parking lot retrofit, and we're doing a lot of these lately. We love a parking lot retrofit because in Tucson, our parking lots are like ovens once the temperature rises. So in this particular case, this parking lot was slated to get repaved, and we saw an opportunity to, as that repave was happening, remove a lot of asphalt to replace it with an earthen vegetated median. And this actually accomplished a couple of different things. Not only does it pull water off of the parking lot, give it a place to go into the soil to support all of these trees and shrubs, but it also decreased the total surface area and driving area of the parking lot, which tackled an issue around crime and nuisance driving patterns. that was a constant burden for our local police department. And so this project ends up being both a green stormwater infrastructure project, but also a traffic calming and safety project. Next. Here's another one. So this is just a huge piece of publicly owned land. It is covered with gravel, and it just becomes an absolute baking oven once the temperature rises. And again, we were able to bring water from the adjacent street under the sidewalk and into some extremely deeply excavated basins. The photo on the right shows the project after 3 solid days of rain. So typically, our projects don't hold water for very long. It has to infiltrate within 48 hours. In this case, because it had rained for days and days in a row, it did sit for a second. But that is one of the things that we really do have to focus on to make sure that we're not creating any hazardous situations around vectors, mosquitoes specifically. But again, adding a walking path and really beautifying and adding a whole bunch of vegetation to what would have been this solar oven spot. Next slide. This is a screen grab of our asset map. So every time we build a new project, it gets added to this map. This is also a map that captures all of that green infrastructure that existed before Storm to Shade was launched in 2021. So this is a comprehensive map of GSI assets across the city, which just recently reached approximately 1,000. Next slide. And so at this point, I'm switching gears and focusing on the maintenance program. Maintenance is really the unsung hero of a successful green infrastructure program. The trend seems to be there's a lot of funding out there to build new projects. New projects are shiny and fun, and everybody can get on board. But then the maintenance piece is often overlooked, and a new project without maintenance is unfortunately often going to fail. So lucky for me, the envisioners of the Storm to Shade program were wise enough to know that maintenance needed to be baked in from the outset. So our maintenance program is part of our fully funded program. We have a dedicated maintenance program manager, and that is all she does, is focus on the maintenance component. We also realized very quickly that we needed to establish a protocol for how GSI gets maintained across the city of Tucson, a protocol that all the various departments in the city could get behind and stand up for. And so we developed this handy dandy little pocket guide, which we publish in both English and Spanish, and we share with everyone. And this pocket guide was created through a very encompassing process where actually happened during COVID. We had 52 stakeholders in Zoom meetings and in breakout sessions, having really in-depth, in the weeds, if you'll excuse me, conversations around what the maintenance of best practices around the maintenance of green stormwater infrastructure look like. And out of that came this guide that we all agreed to adopt. Out of that, we also created a training curriculum, which I'll go into a little bit later. So we've got a funded program, we've got a person, we've got a protocol, and we also have an asset management system. So the asset management system that we use is actually the very same one that Tucson Water uses to maintain pipes, pumps, and all of the various intricacies of a water utility. Our maintenance program manager, to her credit, was able to smush things like inlets and outlets and sediment traps into a system made for pipes and pumps. But it's a wonderful tool to be able to order, track, and pull data on all of the different maintenance activities that we do. And then finally, we found very quickly that it was really important to have very clear memorandums of understanding with the various other departments in the city of Tucson that have green infrastructure in them. So we are the program that constructs and maintains it, but the green infrastructure itself exists on land that belongs to parks, on land that belongs to our Department of Transportation Mobility, on land that belongs to our Department of Housing and Community Development. And so we have agreements with each of those departments to really flesh out roles and responsibilities. Next. Braden, how am I doing on time?
You're doing great. If you want to take maybe another
Perfect.
minutes.
Final slide, 5 minutes. So the previous slide was sort of the fundamentals of a maintenance program for green infrastructure. Those are the things I would say one has to have in order to have a successful maintenance program. This is the one where we really dive into the opportunities that present themselves through a maintenance program. And this is where the people component comes in, and the community and the partnerships. And so right off the bat, public outreach. We have a public outreach coordinator who, whenever we're building a new project, reaches out to the community to let them know that a new project is coming. And not in all cases, but in many, creates opportunities for folks to provide input. Um, if we're partnering with like the Department of Transportation Mobility to build a new bike boulevard, and that bike boulevard could be a GSI bike boulevard, we're not necessarily asking if the community wants that or not, because we know that we want to, as a city, add these heat mitigation in pieces of infrastructure wherever we can. But in some projects, we are able to say, would you like to have input into the plant palette? Are there any plants particularly that you would like to see or that you would not like to see? Would you like a picnic bench? Would you like signage, etc.? And so we do a lot of communicating about future projects and the maintenance of those projects with community members. We also produce signage. So that little emblem, that circle you see, is about this big, and we pop it onto the curb adjacent to every GSI project that we have to raise awareness, and also so that people, when they see it, begin to associate, oh, that's green infrastructure. We also have our phone number on there in case anybody would like to reach out to us with questions or concerns. And then we have resources including a really strong social media presence. So if you're an Instagram or Facebook person, I highly recommend that you look up Storm to Shade Tucson. Our Instagram and Facebook pages are very fun. They really give you a very authentic feel for the nature of the work. And the music is amazing. Next, working with our procurement agency at the city was something that, in retrospect, was very, very significant in our success. Can we go back to the previous slide? So we really wanted to reach landscape maintenance contractors effectively and in a way where we got to target them because of their specific skills around the maintenance of GSI, and then bring in a whole fresh crew of contractors that aren't your typical city of Tucson contractors. So we really started from scratch with our contracts, made them accessible, readable. We offered informational sessions so that folks could show up at times when they're available. We offered food and asked questions about getting a contract with the city of Tucson so that it wasn't this opaque, elusive, intimidating process. And then as far as practitioners go, we were able to reach out into that community of folks who carry these traditions around water conservation, rainwater harvesting with them, and get them to apply to be the contractors. Most of these are either community-based organizations or small green infrastructure practitioners who we've been able to hire and bring on and really help them to scale up their work, because we have such a massive load of work for them to do. And then hands-on contract management. By that, I mean, we know these firms very well, and we get together with them on a regular basis and talk about what's working, what's not working. And it really all comes down to people. We're very interested in elevating the field of landscape maintenance and compensating those folks who are skilled in it as is deserved. And so we really we have a lot of conversations with administration and leaders at those contractors. We provide trainings that we created the curriculum for. They are based on our protocol. They are free and open to the public, and they're delivered regularly. They're incredibly cutting edge as far as the education components are concerned, and they are delivered by experts in the field. And we require these trainings for our practitioners. And then final notes, something that we love to do to support workforce development in this area is to partner with one of our community-based organizations that is able to do a ton of outreach to neighborhoods surrounding our GSI projects and elicit interest in helping to support the maintenance practices. And if folks are interested in getting involved, they can provide stipends to those folks. So we're not asking people to work for free. We're compensating them for that work as they're building skills and getting their feet in the door in this industry if they would like. And then finally, our friends at the county, Pima County, have been able to stand up a program that targets 18 through 28-year-olds who may or may not have graduated from high school, GEDs, aren't necessarily going on to a 4-year degree, and then recruit them if they're interested into this green workforce training that includes 12 weeks of paid instruction. So they're getting paid as they're going through this training, and then paid in apprenticeships with practitioners in the field upon completion, which is just a really exciting thing. It's very new at this point, but we're really happy to support that. And that is what I've got.
Incredible. Well, thank you both so much. And yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will also look for any questions you put in the Q&A to highlight those. So, Fatima, I'll start with you. Can you talk a little bit about the role of consultants in the planning project? I know you gave a NAF talk at one point with the consultants that you worked with on this project, and a lot of folks here will be potentially hiring consultants for their heat planning work. So do you want to highlight some of the things that worked and maybe some of the things that didn't work that you learned from working with consultants on this type of work?
Yeah, so for the heat action roadmap, it was a little different than with the climate action plan. So with the climate action plan, we had a full request for proposals, consultants, a national search for consultants. They applied, did an amazing job, and had like community partners doing the engagement on the ground. For the heat action roadmap, actually the work began internally. When this division was set up, the city manager set up a climate action team with representatives from across different departments. Blue is part of that team. And so we began with the internal team doing just research on best practices, background information, data, who does what in the city. And then we quickly realized that it was a lot of work and on top of everything else that we were doing. And so I hired a PhD student whose focus was on manufacture and mobile homes and energy justice systems. And in fact, Karina Martinez, she's now like one of my star employees. She's wonderful. She leads a lot of our heat work. So she was a student, a PhD student when she supported putting all the pieces together to create the heat action roadmap. We also, like I said, realized that, looking at best practices across the nation is wonderful. And it gives you a really good starting point. But then we realized that we needed community input. We were in a very fast timeline. We wanted to have the heat action roadmap approved before the summer of 2024. And so what we did is we came up with the Southern Arizona Heat Summit. We went to a heat summit organized by the state in Tempe. I think it was in Tempe, and it was supposed to be the statewide strategy around extreme heat. And we realized that only myself and somebody else were the only people from Southern Arizona. So we're like, not only do we need to bring Southern Arizona voices to the state table, but we need to bring this concept of a summit to Tucson. And that summit, we planned it around, okay, let's be very strategic. We are going to have a lot of people in one place. So let's make sure we get the feedback we need for the heat action roadmap. So that summit helped us develop our heat action roadmap, help us provide recommendations to the state, and also help the county with ideas to develop their own heat strategy. And so it wasn't a full-blown like consulting firm request for proposals. It was internal work, background work, and then a PhD student serving as a consultant, helping us put everything together. And then a lot of outreach. We had table events when we asked, now that we have this draft, what do you think about it? What are we missing? A critical piece of this, I think, is the participation of the University of Arizona. Lad Keith is one of our local heat experts, and he, along with other professors, developed this tool for evaluating, um, you know, heat planning and heat governance in plans. And so I basically asked him, can you run our heat action roadmap draft through your tool to see how well it's doing? Because I was like, you know, I would love to get a score of 100. And in order to do that, I want to know what are the missing pieces, right? And so that was a very helpful exercise. And they have done that for many cities. And for us, it was very helpful because it helped us revise our heat action roadmap so that it kind of meets like those national standards of these are the things that you need to cover, including like transportation. Like, the transportation sector plays a critical role in reducing heat trapping emissions. And so, like, those are the pieces that we were doing, but we were not thinking about it. About like, well, this is a heat resilience strategy. We were thinking more about like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, right? And so going through that exercise really allows to make the connections of what a complete heat strategy looks like through, their evaluation process.
Awesome. And then one question, quick question from the chat. What did you all include in your heat relief kits, and how did you get to what you all decided to put in the kits?
Yeah, so we include heat relief supplies, anything from cooling towels, glasses, there were sandals, shoes. We include instant ice packs, we include hats, we include reusable water bottles, water, liquid IV, some ointments for burns. Because we mostly distribute these to the in-house, we also include like hygiene supplies or feminine care packages, food care packages with socks and some creams. And so we, we learned from some of the year-round programming that the city has working with the in-house, their communities, what are the supplies that are needed. But also the first year we included visors, and we didn't see those, like we didn't see people around wearing them. And so we took notes and like, oh, those are not really great. And so the second year we include hats, and we would see them reusable bags. That's where we put everything. We still, if you drive around Tucson, you'll see a bunch of bright color bags. Those are the kids. And so we learn to, when we're packaging them, to include the less plastic as possible because it would end up on the streets. And so we learn by practicing essentially, and also by observing. And also, when we distribute the heat relief kits, we ask the recipients. We do a short survey, but we ask, one of the questions is like, is there anything that, you know, um, you would like us to know so that we improve these kits and supplies for you. And so we also learn from that.
Amazing. Yeah. When we did similar work, we got a lot of feedback on socks and foot
Mhm.
care, because shoe quality with people experiencing homelessness is usually a challenge, and so yeah, I heard very similar things in the engagement that we did. The other surprising one that we got was water bowls for pets and different things for pet cooling as being popular. So yeah, I love how you talked about that and that in-depth learning. Blue, I'd like to pass it to you. One question we had was about just a sense of some of the demonstration projects you showed us, a little bit of sense of costs. And then we have one question in the Q&A here about whether you've done any GSI projects in partnership with any higher education institutions. Oh, by the way, I do have my U of A hat on here. So if there's any examples of that. Fatima
Yes.
obviously talked about the partnerships with Lad Keith and the university on the heat side and data collection and planning best practices, but curious about on your side of the shop as well.
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So the U of A has supported our work in some really important ways. Number one, that GSI maintenance protocol that we developed, this little pocket guide, was developed in collaboration partnership with the University of Arizona, which had applied for and received funding to be able to create a maintenance protocol for the city of Tucson. And so that was a really wonderful process that I could go into a whole presentation on in and of itself, but that was one way. Another study that was completed recently and that is ongoing, still getting a lot of traction, is about the most effective irrigation methods for new trees. So whether you've got drip or bubblers, they looked into dry water, tree diapers, all the different technologies that people are using to establish baby trees. Um, Ultimately, I'll give you the punchline. Bubblers, so like a flood irrigation system, seems to be the most effective in developing a healthy root structure and therefore a more long-lived tree. So you can take all the fancy engineered stuff you want, but in the end, think about how nature would do it, and that's what's going to work best. Um, Another investigation that was done was into biological soil amendment. So that's fancy for like compost, adding compost to your soil. And again, as intuition would have it, having healthy soil with a lot of bacterial, microbacterial processes, activity is better overall for plants and therefore for green stormwater infrastructure landscapes. So you want healthy soil, you want good irrigation that mimics what would happen in natural conditions. Um, Shifting to the question of costs. This is a really kind of unsatisfying one to answer because costs vary greatly. But what I can tell you is we have seen very clearly that working on projects in streets is about 4 times as expensive as working on a project in a park or on just a vacant piece of land. Pulling pavement up is really expensive, getting all the permitting, traffic control, all of those things around streets tend to add your costs really quickly. So there was a moment where we were like, ooh, maybe we should direct more of our funding toward park spaces. But we also then thought about that for a second and realized streets are really where we need to be investing in adding cooling infrastructure because everybody uses the streets, particularly the most heat vulnerable populations. And so we try to really do a wide variety of projects from in parks to along streets, greenways, bike paths, pedestrian safety projects. Just for a quick snapshot, our average project cost is between like $200,000 and $300,000, but that doesn't tell you much because that could be, in a park like one of the photos that I showed, or it could be a series of chicanes along a bike route. So not much to tell there other than that working in streets is expensive, but worth it for the return.
Awesome. And one thing that I wanted to just say is, first of all, thank you both so much for presenting today. Tucson's work and the work that you're seeing here is built on decades of work that's been happening. And so by no means is our grant program expecting you to like be Tucson in a year. That's not what we're doing. But we're hopeful that you can see that the partnerships that they have, the way that they're thinking about long-term heat protection, the way that they're combining heat mitigation with heat response. There's so many great lessons learned. I love the graphics that both of them have in terms of how they're having very short, pithy ways of talking about who's harmed by heat and talking about how solutions work. There's just so much valuable. We will be sending the video out from this. I recommend for those of you that want to get nerdy about this that you rewatch this video. And we just can't thank you enough. Sign up for our newsletter for future events, and then hopefully we'll see some of you next week for both Austin and Salt Lake City. Huge thank you to the city of Tucson, both to both of you for joining us today, and thank you all for participating in the discussion. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.